Hi. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the Encircle House for giving us this beautiful venue for this Pre-General Conference Fireside. I had a lot of time to prepare and think about what General Conference means for me and also for LGBTQ people, specifically LGBTQ Mormons. And I spent a lot of time going back and remembering what it was like for me to go to General Conference, or just when General Conference time came up. And it's really evolved over time. When I was, 6 or 7, it just meant skipping church. And it meant, staying in pajamas and staying at home or watching it, at the church every once in a while. And when I got older and when I went to high school, General Conference was a really sacred experience for me. It was beautiful. It represented community. In some ways, it was like I could really feel my place in God's kingdom. And I felt like I was included and I had a family. And I relied on that every 6 months to get back in touch with what felt like a bigger family to me. And I held on to those talks like they were gold and truth, and I played them over and over again in my car when I was traveling, or I would highlight my Ensign articles until there was nothing else to color. And then I got back from my mission and I came out. And suddenly General Conference took on a new feeling, because I had a really hard time finding myself in the plan. And conference became something that I worried about. One of my most poignant memories in my coming out phase is sitting in my room and listening to a particular speaker talk about the plan and feeling so deeply that I just couldn't find my name or my story as part of that plan. And I don't speak tonight just as a gay man. I have thought in all of my preparation deeply about what it means to be LGBTQ and what it might be like for the many individuals in our community who are gay or lesbian or bisexual, intersex, asexual, transgender, anyone on the spectrum. There's an experience that we share, and it's generally an experience of struggling to find our place in the plan of salvation to some extent. And I have such there's a reverence that has come over me as I think about what is required of us to establish a relationship with God. And to know that none of us have taken that relationship for granted because we've had to fight for it, whatever that relationship looks like. And so tonight, I want to recognize and acknowledge that General Conference might just be a thing that passes, a date that passes, and you kind of forget about it. That's kind of where I've been for the last couple of years. It moved out of a place of being so frustrating or so painful into being just another General Conference. And I get to have a special dinner with my family or something. And that's that. And I acknowledge that there are many of us for whom this is still very painful. And wherever you are is okay to be. And tonight, I thought a lot about what I wanted to share to connect to you. And especially in my first kind of official public address as Affirmation President, I thought that it would be appropriate for me to tell my spiritual journey and share it with you. There are parts of this journey that I have not ever shared publicly that I'm going to share tonight because it's a relevant part of my story, and I hope that somewhere within this journey you can find yourself or connect to something that feels authentic. So, buckle up, we're going for a ride on the spiritual journey with Carson. So, I have a pretty typical coming out story. I came out a year after my mission. I told my parents, I looked in the mirror and it was like that moment of like, oh, this isn't changing, okay, how do I incorporate this into my life? And I was determined to marry a woman. I had a missionary who I was waiting for, my best friend, and if I didn't marry a woman, I was to remain celibate. And that was my plan. And my friend came home from her mission and we talked, and it was clear that every indication said that we should not pursue a relationship. And we grieved it together, we wept together, and we went on our separate ways, and she started dating other people, and I kind of steeled myself for a life of celibacy. And as I kind of went down that path, life became very dark for me. The girl that I waited for, in my mind, was truly the only girl that I could have ever married. We were best friends growing up. And it became clear, spiritually and on so many levels, that this was not the path for me. I want to add in a little piece here where I say that I know that this is just my story. And there are individuals who have followed a very authentic path into mixed orientation marriages or into a nuanced place that works for them. And so I want to make sure it's clear that my story is my story. And that's what I'm sharing here. So I started dating. And the light came back on in my life. I felt the Spirit again. I remember going on my first date and sitting at the dinner table across from this boy and feeling so excited and so nervous, and then going back to church on Sunday and having the notes out on my phone and just getting in touch with everything I could possibly feel and asking, is this right? And everything felt perfect. And I just did that over and over and over. I was so deliberate. I wanted to make sure that I did nothing that I regretted, which might have been a regret later in life, but that's another story. And so I ended up getting into a relationship with someone, and it was at that time, it was Christmas time, he left to go visit his family, and I was out of school. I went to a trampoline park with my family, and many of you know how this story ends. I ended up breaking my neck at that trampoline park and being paralyzed from my chest down. I was life-flighted immediately to the University of Utah, where they did a couple of spinal fusions to minimize any extra damage that could have been done. And I began the process of rehabilitation. I had a very close friend start a blog called Carson's Road Home that kind of journaled what was happening to me in the hospital so my friends and family could keep tabs on me. And I got a call from this friend, his name is Adam, and Adam said, hey, Elder L. Tom Perry, the Apostle's secretary, is in town, or excuse me, it was from the secretary, saying, Elder L. Tom Perry's in town, and he wants to come and visit you. And so I said, well, I'll check my schedule. But I said, yes, I'd love to, Thursday at 1 o'clock or whatever it was, right? I wasn't going to turn that appointment down. And so Elder Perry came to visit me. Now I want to make it clear that I was already on this like spiritually shaky ground, because for the first time in my life, I was experiencing a light that really didn't line up with a life path that I thought would bring that kind of light, according to what I had been taught at church. And there's a small period of time after you have a spinal cord injury where there's swelling in your spinal column. It's called spinal shock. And it makes it impossible for doctors to tell what the prognosis will be. It's a torturous waiting time where you just have to sit and look for anything that returns below your level of injury. And spinal shock can last a couple of months to my understanding, and I was within the time frame of seeing that things weren't returning for me. And it was like that point of realizing I either needed a miracle to have the life that I had worked for those 23 years, or I needed to prepare for a life in a wheelchair. It was, I could not have been more desperate for the truth of a resurrection or for miracles or the power of the priesthood. And so when Elder Perry came walking through that room, through the doorway, he was my last hope. And I was in a loaner chair at the time. I was sitting down. I invited him to sit on the small couch with his wife. She asked me if I had a girlfriend. I said no and left it at that. And he started giving us just some counsel as a family. He told me to take every day head on. He told me that I would be a light in my family, even though I was the paralyzed one, and that I needed to be strong for everyone. And he asked me if I wanted a blessing, and I said yes. So he stood up, and I'm in my chair, and he asks Adam to anoint me, and he does. And he puts his hand on my head and gives me a blessing. And I am listening to every word that comes out of his mouth because I'm desperate. And he blesses me to listen to the doctors, to listen to my physicians, to give everything I can in physical therapy. He tells me to be sensitive to the Spirit and to look for God in my life and to find his path for me. And then he says the words that I'm hoping for, to some degree. He says, if you do all of these things, even a full recovery is possible. And he ended the blessing. He pointed at me and said, I've got a good feeling about you. Complimented my scar on the back of my neck. And then he left. And I did everything within my power to follow Elder Perry's counsel. I took on extra physical therapy sessions. I asked my doctors, my occupational therapist, I said, what has no spinal cord injured person ever done before leaving a hospital? And I did it. I put in the time, I put in the prayers. I was as in touch as I could be spiritually. And month after month passed, and I remained in the chair. Nothing came back. And I was forced to ask some really difficult questions. I had to do something with this information. Did this not happen because I didn't try hard enough? Had I not put in enough effort? Did it happen because I was gay? Was I still in this chair because there was something that God was unhappy with me about because of this? That even though I had done everything to be in touch with him, that this was still somehow punishment? Was that it? Was it that Elder Perry really wasn't guided by God? Or was it that this healing was someday going to happen in the distant future and I just had to wait? The answer to any of those questions did not bring me peace. And I was forced into this, what felt like a spiritual, like a traumatic experience of losing my faith at the point that I most needed it. That I most needed to believe that one day I would walk again, that one day I'd play the flute again, that I'd have everything that I wanted so desperately. And this began a very important faith journey for me. A faith journey that many of you are familiar with. It's not a part of our journey, or a part of my journey just because I have a spinal cord injury. It's a part of what I believe is just the human spiritual journey to find God. Part of this realization so I was in my basement, And I'm going through recovery still. It's still very early. And I look at my younger brother and my younger sister. And I was hit by this like deep fear of realizing that I didn't really know if I was going to see them after this life. My faith had kind of dissolved into I don't know what happens after this. Is there a God? My foundation had crumbled. And it was the first time that I realized that I didn't know stuff. I didn't know anything that I said I had known all growing up. When I stood at that pulpit and I said that I knew that God lived, I believed that God lived. And I realized and had the experience of learning what faith really is, which is specifically not knowing something. And I realized that faith is not knowing the sun will rise, lighting each new day. It's specifically not knowing if the sun is going to come up over the horizon. There can be a hope that it comes up. There can be a belief that it will rise. But we know from the teachings in the Book of Mormon even, that faith ceases to be faith when it's knowledge. I was sitting across the couch from a dear friend who's in this audience when she shared a quote with me that really captured what I was experiencing. And it's from Brene Brown, who I low-key worship. She says, faith minus vulnerability and mystery equals extremism. If you've got all the answers, then don't call what you do faith. And during this time, I found another quote that really spoke to me by Anne Lamott. It says, the opposite of faith is not doubt, but certainty. Certainty is missing the point entirely. Faith includes noting the mess, the emptiness, the discomfort, and letting it be there until some light returns. Faith also means reaching deeply within for the sense one was born with. So I embarked on this very vulnerable spiritual journey once my faith had crumbled to the ground. And I know that so many of you understand what this feeling is like, of building up from nothing. I was attending a stake conference. This was about a year ago during the summertime, and Elder Russell Ballard was a visiting general authority, and they had asked me to play the flute to accompany the choir, and also actually asked me to lead the congregation. And I'm assuming that they didn't know that I had been inactive in church for almost a year when they asked me. But I enjoyed participating in music, so I said yes. And going into the meeting, I took a rainbow ribbon and I pinned it to the side of my chair very conspicuously because I was there. I needed something to affirm me in that space, and I remember holding on to this ribbon while I listened to the talks and the testimonies and felt confusion, felt some grief. It was during a time where I was still kind of trying to rewrite my story, knowing that I didn't believe certain things, but not really knowing what I actually could hold on to. Like, what do I actually believe? Can I verbalize it? Can I write it down? So I grabbed my choir folder, I took out the mechanical pencil, and I just began to write on a blank sheet of paper. And the first words that I wrote were, what do I believe? Who is God? And I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote for the last 2 hours, and I took a break and led a song, and then I got back and I wrote. And what emerged from that page were just a few foundational beliefs that kept me clinging to something. And what came out really was the word whole. That whoever God was, I believed that God cared about each of us finding our most whole selves. our most actualized, our most beautiful, authentic expression of who we are. And that, for me, it didn't seem to matter how we got there, whether it was through the Mormon Church or through any other religion or spirituality, that godliness was wholeness, and that perfection is a wholeness. And this brought up a lot of peace for me. I left that building feeling peace because I felt like I could hold on to something. I felt like I could pursue a spiritual journey because I was finding my best Carson. But then it introduced all sorts of other questions, like, what is my best Carson? Who do I want to be? It kind of opened up a certain vulnerability because it was suddenly up to me. And I had to get in touch with something very deep inside of me to find out what that was. So it was probably the second year of my spinal cord injury that I read The Alchemist for the first time. And The Alchemist is a story, for those of you who may not have read it, is a story about a young man named Santiago who has a recurring dream. As he's lying under this sycamore tree, sleeping, he has this dream that he goes on a journey and finds treasure in ancient Egypt among the pyramids. He has this dream so often that he goes to a fortune teller and he asks, "What does this mean?" She tells him it's a prophecy, and she tells him that he needs to go on this journey to find the treasure. Santiago is feeling safe as a shepherd where he lives, doing his shepherd things. And there's a poignant moment when he has to decide whether or not he's going to go on this very risky journey to find something that he felt in a dream. So he sells his sheep and he begins this journey. This journey takes him to all sorts of places that he didn't expect. At one point, he becomes very wealthy, and he stays for a while in a certain place that he never thought a treasure seeker would stay. Later, he goes on to be part of a caravan crossing a desert, and he meets an alchemist. An alchemist is someone who, so alchemy is kind of the process of purification, purifying a substance. True alchemists can take lead and make it into gold. And in the process, alchemists are themselves purified and find a certain, it's a spiritual journey of finding their authentic selves as they go through these processes. So Santiago continues on the journey with the alchemist and finally finds himself at the pyramids. And he comes to realize through a series of events, after he's been beaten, after he's been robbed, that the treasure he seeks is actually buried directly under the place where he was having all of these dreams. And so he packs up and he travels all the way back to Andalusia where he started his journey and digs deep and finds all of the treasure he was looking for in the first place, and then creates a beautiful life for himself. This story has spoken so deeply to me because the journey that Santiago takes, he learns, is called the journey to find his personal legend, which is kind of akin to his destiny. He's looking for his reason for being alive. What is his journey and where is it taking him? And along the way, he finds omens. And there are these signs that the universe gives that point a certain direction for him. And in the end, finds himself right back where he started. when I think about the process that it takes each of us to find our most beautiful, most authentic selves, which I believe is a very spiritual journey. I believe it's the journey that God intended for all of us. I see ourselves going on what might seem like an aimless journey to find something that we don't really know we're looking for at times. It requires of us to get in touch with something so deep within ourselves, and requires us to let go of the certainty and vulnerably make decisions that sometimes seem risky, that sometimes leave us feeling beat up or robbed, and ultimately end up in us finding our truest, deepest selves. When I think of the many spiritual traditions that I'm familiar with, including the Mormon tradition, finding completion and finding wholeness is often coupled with a description of happiness and a description of peace. And I've found my own peace as I've gone on this journey and found that sense of wholeness in a very messy, in a very atypical way to what I always thought that it would be growing up. So, it's Easter here, right? In just a little bit. And while I was preparing these remarks, I remember sitting in my room. Okay, so this was like 2 years ago. This is 2 years ago that this happened. I'm sitting in my room, and it's dimly lit. I just have like my little side lamp on, and I have such clear memory of this. And I hadn't read or opened my scriptures for at least months, if not years at this point. And I was feeling this longing to get in touch with something spiritual, something that seemed familiar. Easter used to be my favorite holiday. It represented like a newness of life, and winter was ending, and little baby ducks, and of course Easter eggs and all the other fun things, but really the spiritual rebirth is what spoke so much to me during Easter time. And I was sitting in bed with this kind of heavy feeling, and I decided that I was going to read Matthew chapter 5, because that's the Beatitudes. I just wanted something not Mormon and simply kind of like base Christianity, something that I knew I could trust and would hopefully bring back some familiarity of something beautiful and spiritual. And for the first time, I read those words as an LGBTQ person. And this is what I read. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I could do that. For me, being gay didn't affect that at all. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. I could do that. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. And Christ continues to unfold the new higher law of what it means to be a disciple. And he speaks about loving not just your neighbor, but loving your enemy. Walking 2 miles with the person who asked you to go 1. And it was the first time that it sunk so deep into my soul that being LGBT for me was exactly what I not just had to experience, but got to experience in order to be my whole self. That a whole Carson could never be straight. And that my experience of being closest to God was an experience that was very closely tied to my experience with being LGBT. There's nothing in these Beatitudes that I couldn't do, or that I couldn't do better because I happen to be gay. In the end here, Christ says, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." The Greek translation for perfect in the King James Version is whole. And this is the essence of the gospel. It's to find our whole selves. It's to blossom and grow into something that we were always meant to be. And I believe that that journey can look like a million different things, but that to follow God or to follow the divine within us means being true to what we feel and what we hear from our deepest selves. I don't know what's going to come out of General Conference in the next couple of days. And I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't a little concerned for the most vulnerable in our community. For that Carson who was sitting in his room sobbing as a 17-year-old because he didn't know what to do with his faith and his sexuality. But affirmation exists as a pillar, as a foundation for everyone involved to affirm that you have nothing to be ashamed of, that your gender identity or your sexual orientation or any experience that you have is a part of finding this personal legend, finding what we have to offer the world. And I, of course, hope that we see sensitive, kind remarks. It's my hope that some kind individual will see what I see and affirm the beauty and the wholeness of LGBT people in the world. And regardless of what happens, my request is that we all turn to the individuals in our lives who have safely accompanied us on this journey to find our best selves, to affirm the godliness inside of us, not in spite of being LGBTQ, but because of it. So be gentle with yourselves this weekend. Reach out. If you don't feel like you have someone to reach out to me. Reach out to our Facebook groups. Reach out to anyone you feel is safe. And we're on this journey together. And I'm grateful that I have your examples. I'm grateful that I get to share on this journey with you. And thank you so much for being here and sharing this evening with me.
All right, we have refreshments. Feel free to hang out, mingle. Don't feel like you have to rush out. So, thank you, Carson.
Perfect timing.
Perfect.
Yeah.